Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Jeremy Crow, and this is my YouTube channel. And tonight we're going to talk about whether Thelema is a left-hand path or a right-hand path, or somewhere in between. So if you are interested in participating in this discussion, we do have a live chat tonight. If you're watching this after the fact, then feel free to leave a comment below. Also, if you're watching this live, I do have a poll set up with, you can only set up to 4 different possible answers, but we have yes, no. Is Thelema a left-hand path? Yes, no. It's a middle path, or it can be either left-hand path or right-hand path. And so far, we've only had 2 votes, and one of them is it's a middle path, and the other vote was for it can be either. So if you are completely new to this topic, let me just define some terms for you here. But first, I noticed that we've got a few comments already here. We have Wraith says, early support, very interesting discussion tonight. And Beyond Zebra says, howdy, Jeremy. Hello, both of you, and whoever else is watching. Thank you for showing up this evening. All right, so Thelema is the occult system that was developed by Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was a extremely influential figure in ritual magic and the occult scene in the Western esoteric tradition. He was infamous, actually, in, I think there was a British newspaper that referred to him as the most evil man alive, something along those lines. And he reveled in the idea of infamy, and he believed in that kind of idea of there is no such thing as bad press. So he would play up this image that he had of being evil. And, you know, there's stories I could get into, but it's kind of irrelevant to the topic. He referred to himself as the Great Beast, which is something that apparently his mother used to refer to him as when he was a kid. Aleister Crowley joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and many say that it was because of him that that order collapsed initially, the initial version of it at least. And this is in the late 1700s. Actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I should look that up. He was born in 1777, I think. Let me just check here. No, I'm getting it by 100 years off. So he was born 1875, and he passed 1947. It says here that he was a ceremonial magician, poet, novelist, mountaineer, and painter. Yeah, he was a lot of things. He was a sort of a Renaissance man, you could say. Indiana Obelisk says 777. Yeah. So there was this book of correspondences that was compiled initially by, I believe it was MacGregor Mathers, from the one of the founders of the Golden Dawn. And Crowley took that document and he elaborated it much further and published it as 777. And now this was a book of correspondences. So you took like the planets, and you could look up what gemstone or what metal or what herbs or what magical implement was associated with each planet, for example. And you had this full system, and that was used for creating rituals and establishing, like if you wanted to do a ritual for that was related to Venus, you could utilize something that had copper in it to represent that, or to enhance the Venusian energy. So things like that. So 777 was a reference book that Crowley published. Crowley published a lot of material, and some of it was material that he was leaking or revealing that he didn't necessarily write, but he did write a massive amount of material. And you have book Magic Without Tears, you have book 4, you have the Equinox, which was I believe it was initially a series of articles which got collected and published and into a series of books. Okay, we have a few. I think we've got another vote. A bunch more votes actually. So, is Thelema a left-hand path? 29% at this point say yes. 14% say no. It's a middle path, 43%, and it can be either is 14%. So currently, it's changing. It's changing. We're getting more votes here. Currently, it's a toss-up between yes and it's a middle path. Indiana Obelisk is giving a couple super chats here. Thank you so much for the financial support. I appreciate that, Indiana Obelisk. If you want to financially support this channel, I do have super chats activated on this channel. Another way that you can support what I'm doing here is by going to the Patreon, which there's a link in the description below. And that is another way to financially support. But one way you can support this channel is just by clicking the like button on this video. That's probably one of the biggest ways you can support this channel. And it doesn't even cost anything. It just takes 1 second. Anonymous Boss says, how are you doing? I'm doing great. How about yourself? Wraith says, favorite Aleister Crowley book, The Book of the Law. Yeah, so that is a founding document of Thelema, and it is considered, I believe they refer to it as a Class 1 document, which is essentially scripture for the religion of Thelema. Now, Thelema, I referred to it earlier as a system of occultism, but it could also be referred to as a religion. And Crowley, Aleister Crowley, declared himself to be the prophet of this new religion called Thelema. Now, the word Thelema itself is, I believe it's Greek, and it translates into will. Now, a big part of Thelema is discovering what your true will is. And your true will isn't just what you simply desire. It is more like the concept of dharma in Eastern philosophy, if you're familiar with that. Almost like your duty or destiny, some sort of halfway between the concept of destiny and duty. And so the Book of the Law was 3 chapters, and when you join an esoteric order called the OTO, which stands for the Ordo Templi Orientis, which means the Order of Eastern Templars. when you join that esoteric order, you get a copy of the Book of the Law. And during that initiation ritual, that very first one called Minerval, which is the 0 degree, and it's almost like probationer in a sense, you could call it that, where you are getting to know whether or not the system of the OTO is for you or not, and whether you decide you want to go further or not. And in that degree, you do read one of the chapters of the Book of the Law. And Crowley received this Book of the Law. Essentially, he channeled it, that's what he claims, from a being called Awas, which he also claimed was his higher self or his holy guardian angel. And it became a founding document of the religion of Thelema. So let's define, there's so many different ways that I can explore what Thelema is, but talk about Aleister Crowley, but let's define some other terms here. So we're talking about whether or not Thelema is a left-hand path as opposed to a right-hand path. So what is a left-hand path and what is a right-hand path? Well, the terms right-hand path and left-hand path originally come from Hinduism. And in Hinduism, it essentially meant whether or not you were taking the standard institutional path of, the standardized mainstream religious path to enlightenment, or if you were taking almost like a dangerous or a shortcut almost, where you would delve into taboo practices, including I see here Indiana Obelisk mentions sexual aspect. Yeah, so sex magic is one element of that was often practiced on the left-hand path in Hindu Tantra, for example. And sometimes substances like entheogens or mind-altering substances were utilized. Other different taboos were explored as paths towards enlightenment, and that was considered the left-hand path. So the standard institutional path of mainstream religion, or these experimental, often taboo practices. So that was the difference between the right-hand path and the left-hand path in Hinduism. Now those terms ended up getting translated over into the Western esoteric tradition, and especially people like Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, from the founder of the Theosophical Society. And it influenced a lot of the Western esoteric tradition, and it took on a little bit of a different meaning. Anthony says Crowley was all about balance. So if you're on one path, to practice the other to balance yourself. Interesting. Class A documents, Anthony said. Yeah, Class A documents is a term that's referred to in, you could call it Orthodox Thelema, where they classify certain texts, especially that Crowley wrote, and whether or not they are considered scripture or if they're just speculative or things like that. There's different classes of document. Stu says Aleister Crowley studied Thelema and many other sources of ancient occult knowledge. His dark arts, witchcraft, and satanic practices pushed into fresh and alternative methods of magical ceremonial rituals. That's an interesting way of putting it. Crowley didn't study Thelema. Crowley originated Thelema. And so based on the way that you've worded that, I take it that you probably would say that yes, it is a left-hand path. That's my guess, is what you're kind of getting at there. Let me see here. Wraith said a lot of Aleister Crowley's material came from Paschal Beverly Randolph, especially the sexual alchemy rituals. Yeah, so Paschal Beverly Randolph was a part of an esoteric order referred to as the Brotherhood of Luxor, if I remember correctly. And he taught sex magic rituals as part of that order. And it was very taboo at the time. And even during Crowley's time, it was considered extremely taboo. And so that's one reason that a lot of people think of Thelema as left-hand path, is because he utilized sex magic in his occult system of Thelema. And to a lot of people, automatically that makes it a left-hand path. However, it gets a little complicated because Aleister Crowley, in his own writings about Thelema, he specifically referred to it as right-hand path. Now let's get into a little bit of what in the Western esoteric tradition right-hand path and left-hand path typically refer to. So if you are practicing the right-hand path in the Western esoteric tradition, then that generally means that you are either practicing a mainstream religious path, or it means that as an esotericist, you are seeking a static union with the divine in some way or another. And often that involves dissolving your ego death. It involves subsuming your own personal will into the divine will. Often you hear people say to become an instrument of God's will or of the universal will, to become a channel of God's will, to surrender your own individual ego for that union with the divine, and to become an instrument of God's will in the world. The left-hand path, on the other hand, pardon the pun, is often described as the individual path towards achieving apotheosis. Now, apotheosis is a fancy word for meaning to become a god, to become a force of nature, a creative force in the world that influences the world at large, in your own right, to become a god or a force of will that is exerting your will upon the world. And you can also utilize the word autotheosis. And that is a fancy word for becoming one's own highest god. So not accepting any other authority external to the self, to become one's own highest authority in your own personal life. That would be left-hand path. Let me see here. Yeah, his family was a part of Plymouth Brethren. Yeah, so Crowley had a very religious upbringing, and of course that's going to impact somebody's opinion on things. Let me see here. Stu says, yes, definitely left-hand path in my opinion. Mr. Fantastic Bear says, I find that if you look very closely at so many practices, you'll find that the practice is both and neither left or right hand. It is how the practitioner uses the art that makes it left or right. Yeah, I think that's a really good take on it, because a lot of people definitely utilize Thelema as a left-hand path. There are a lot of people that utilize Thelema as a right-hand path. Yeah, Aradia Phoenix said Crowley himself said it's not left-hand path, and that he is against it as well as black magic. That's right. So Crowley himself, the founder of Thelema, said that Thelema was right-hand path. He said that it is not left-hand path, and he even has a whole exploration of what he refers to as the left-hand path, which he speaks of the practitioners of the left-hand path. He refers to them as black brothers. And, you know, the terminology now has certain connotations to it that I don't think that existed back then. But he said that a practitioner of the left-hand path, this is what Crowley said, and I'm paraphrasing, that they would bring themselves to the brink of enlightenment, you could call it, but then they would hold themselves back from the abyss. So Crowley had this idea that you would enter into the abyss and you would give up everything, including your holy guardian angel, and become a babe of the abyss. And he had this idea of at the point of death, and this is for Thelema, this isn't left-hand path, this is what he said you do in Thelema, that at the point of death you give every last drop of yourself, every last drop of blood, everything into the cup of Babylon, and you don't hold anything back. And he said if you do hold back, then you become a left-hand path practitioner, or this is what the left-hand path does. And then they seek to envelop themselves in their own isolated universe that they've kind of created, this bubble universe that they become the god of. And you'll see similar ideas if you look into the Temple of Set, which is an explicitly left-hand path organization that has in this idea that you will the left-hand path goal is to become a god of a universe that you spawn off yourself. What else we have here? Anonymous Boss, thank you for the super chat. Hello, Jeremy. I have one off-topic question. Do you have an altar for Beelzebub as of now? Thank you again for your amazing insight. I do not currently have an altar for Beelzebub. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you'll know that I did have encounters with Beelzebub, and I did work with Beelzebub at one point, but I do not currently have an altar for Beelzebub. Let's see here. Indiana Obelisk says, does demonic work left and right angelic magic? Oh yeah, does demonic work left and right angelic magic? Yeah, maybe. Well, no, I don't think that that's correct, because if you are working with angels, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are right-hand path. And if you work with demons, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're left-hand path. A lot, or pretty much all of the classic grimoires that teach about how to call demons forth and get them to help you with your various different magical or occult goals or material goals even. Most of those were written from a right-hand path perspective, where you would call upon names of God in order to constrain the demon, to call forth the demon and to constrain it to your will, to have it do your bidding. And those would require you to stand in the light of God, in a sense, to borrow the authority of God. And to do so, you would have had to been a right-hand path practitioner typically, and invoke God and invoke the power of angels and archangels and such to do so. So demonic work doesn't necessarily mean that you are left-hand path. Although nowadays, if you are working with demons, you are more likely to be a left-hand path practitioner. Let's see here. Gog says, my litmus test is, will the right-hand path accept and befriend your practice? If not, no matter how much you call yourself a white magus, or no matter how you strive to sanitize your practice, your left-hand path. Well, I don't know if I agree with that, Gog, because what if you are Christian and you are practicing a mainstream Christian religion? Then you are a right-hand path practitioner, right? Well, what if you are a Muslim and you are an orthodox form of Muslim and you are not practicing anything outside of standard mainstream institutional Islam? Does that Christian consider you a would they accept that practice of the Muslim practice? Or what if you are a right-hand path Hindu? Is that Christian going to consider you, are they going to accept and befriend your practice? No. So right-hand paths often disagree with one another and do not accept one another as valid. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are automatically left-hand path. If one of various different right-hand paths don't accept you. Let's see here. So now let's get into the idea of true will. So this is very key to the concept of Thelema. So one thing that Crowley said was that if you are practicing your true will, if you have made contact, knowledge, and conversation with your holy guardian angel, as he put it, and you have received from your holy guardian angel the knowledge of what your true will is. Like I said, it's not just something that you feel is your desire. It is something that is handed down to you from your holy guardian angel in the system of Thelema. If you have made that knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel, and you've received your true will from the holy guardian angel, and if you are practicing it truly and sincerely, then you will never come into full conflict with any other individual who is also practicing their true will. And like I said, true will is very close to the Eastern concept of Dharma. Anthony says true will equals service to humanity, not egoic desires. Right, so that implies, if you are practicing your true will, which is an important part of Thelema, that you will be essentially practicing the universal will, or the divine will, you could say, the plan that the universe or the divine has for you, because you'll be fitting perfectly into this system, essentially, into the plan. And to me, that heavily implies right hand path. And also the ecstatic union with the divine, especially at the point of death or in after death. That is an important part of Thelema as well. Now, I do feel like for a lot of Thelema, you also have these ideas like the Great Beast, which Crowley called himself. And you have the hymn to Lucifer, and you have this idea that Aiwass, Crowley, the name that Crowley said was the name of his own holy guardian angel, that is Satan. That there are writings out there that from Crowley himself that he says that. Anthony says, could a static union be at death of ego? Yeah, definitely. So you don't have to die physically. It can be an ego death experience where you have that ecstatic union, the ecstatic union with the divine. And so yeah, I mean, sorry, this conversation has kind of gone all over the place, but ultimately Crowley believed, or Crowley claimed, that Thelema was a right-hand path, and there's a strong argument to be made for that. However, there are elements that would be classically associated with the left-hand path, in particular the sex magic that he performed and included as a very strong component of Thelema that is traditionally associated with the left-hand path. He also famously did a lot of drugs and considered that to be part of his path. I mean, he wrote a biography called Diary of a Dope Fiend, and using entheogens is often considered one of those taboo practices that are a hallmark of the left-hand path. Although it's not, if you are a left-hand path, that doesn't mean you have to do drugs. I'm just saying. It's not something that's typically considered part of the right-hand path. And then you also have these demonic or devil-type figures that he worked with in a lot of the writings that he produced, including Satan, including Lucifer, that sort of thing. So, and the great beasts which he associated himself with. So you have, I feel like my own personal conclusion is that it is a right-hand path, but it has a lot of elements of the left-hand path within it. And it could almost be seen as a precursor to more fully left-hand path systems. And it was an extremely influential system. And now let me see what we have here for the poll. At this point, it's a middle path is the highest, had the highest number of votes. 50% of the votes said it's a middle path, and we've had 16 votes so far this evening. The second highest is yes, it is a left-hand path. So yeah, my personal answer, or what I believe, is that Thelema is technically a right-hand path, but that it has a lot of left-hand path elements, and it utilizes a lot of
traditionally left-hand path tools, and that it could be seen as a precursor to the left-hand path, and that it can be used or utilized as a left-hand path if the individual practitioner chooses. So calling it a middle path is definitely one way. I would probably vote it can be either. That's probably what my vote is. It can be either. But it leans more toward the right-hand path, I would say. Personally, that's my personal opinion. Also, I wanted to mention here before, because I'm going to have to wrap this up soon, but after this live stream, there will be a private meeting for members of the Novus Ordo Luciferi, and it won't be a formal lesson this evening. It'll just be a casual discussion, a hangout, you could say, where people can ask questions. We can chat about whatever we feel like. We can share fellowship with one another, and that's going to happen. I had scheduled it for 11:11 Eastern time, so that's in just a few minutes. We can go a little bit past here tonight on the live stream if we want, but I wanted to kind of wrap it up soon because I have that meeting scheduled for afterwards. Now, if you're not a member of the Novus Ordo Luciferi or NOL, you can join now if you want by going to the Patreon in the link in the description of this video. And if you join at the $5 or higher tier, then that gets you access, or that gets you access to the Novus Ordo Luciferi, and it'll unlock the most recent post on the Patreon, which has a private meeting link to tonight's private hangout online, and we're gonna hang out and chat about whatever we want to talk about. We're probably gonna continue this conversation even further, and you can participate by jumping in and turning on your mic, turning on your camera if you want, and we can have a discussion. You can have a discussion with other members and continue this conversation. Or we can talk about anything else we feel like if you want. But let's see here. So if we want also, I think I'm going to probably have to do a part 2 of this video because I'm going to try and compare Thelema with Luciferianism. So the next live stream, I'll probably do that topic, is how does Thelema compare to Luciferianism? And I've got some very interesting insights about that, as I have personally participated in the OTO. I was a practitioner of Thelema at one time in the past, and I currently, and for the last about 25 years or more, have considered myself to be a Luciferian. So I have a unique perspective on that as having practiced both. And I do think that there are some interesting similarities and some differences as well that we can get into on the next live stream. Let's see here. Okay, so the polls ended. 16 votes, and It's a Middle Path had the most votes, and It Is a Left-Hand Path was the second highest. So that is very interesting. It's not quite what my answer was, in my personal opinion. Let's see here. Anthony said also, I think he used satanic imagery because he saw Thelema as fulfilling and being the next step of Christianity / monotheism. Interesting. We know the religion called the old gods demons, so I feel that's why he demonized Christianity and uplifted the satanic imagery. That's very interesting. Anthony also said, Lamb is a portal, but yes, most people see it as a gray alien. Yeah, Indiana Obelisk mentions that he met an alien as well, correct? Lamb. So there is a famous drawing or painting that Aleister Crowley produced of a being that he claimed to have contacted called Lamb, and it has a very big head, although different from what a gray alien would typically be portrayed as. It didn't have the big giant black eyes, it had very small eyes, and they had like whites and a pupil. So it doesn't quite fit the classic image of a gray alien, but people definitely see it that way, especially because of the shape of the head of this creature or entity that Crowley claimed to have contacted and drew the picture of. So that's another topic we can get into in a future live stream. But I think the next live stream I'm going to get into comparing Thelema with Luciferianism. And so if you want to make sure that you catch that, you can subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so that you'll be notified through YouTube when I'm going to do a live stream. But you can also join, if you go to the Patreon, you don't even have to pay. If you just become a free follower of the Patreon, then when I do a live stream, you will get an email notification that I'm going to be going live that day and what time. Usually I do them around 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, but in August I'm going to try doing a bunch of different time slots so that people who can't stay up as late or who are in different parts of the world will have an opportunity to participate in the community. But I really appreciate everybody who stopped by this evening. Thanks for anybody who participated in the live chat, who voted in the poll. If you are watching this after the fact, thank you so much for watching to the end. If you have an opinion, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click that like button. And for the members of the Novus Ordo Luciferi, I'll see you in just a minute in our private meeting that's going to start in just as soon as I wrap this up. And until next time, everyone, stay loose.